Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In the sprawling metropolis of Chicago, where skyscrapers pierce a sky often laden with gray clouds, the Mercy General Hospital stood like a fortress dedicated to health, but also a place where the pressure never stopped. The corridors were often filled with tired professionals, hurried stretchers, and the incessant drone of medical machines. The emergency room and intensive care unit were regularly overflowing with patients, each with their own stories, their own pain, their own silent cries. Among the staff members there were Angela Brooks, a 34-year-old black nurse who had worked at the hospital for 6 long years. Angela had begun her career with a bubbling energy and a clear calling: to care for others, especially those the system had forgotten or relegated to the shadows. She had often chosen the night shifts or the most difficult positions, where the patient's loneliness was most palpable. It wasn't just a job for her. It was a mission, a deep and personal commitment. Angela wasn't a spectacular heroine. She didn't have the immaculate blouse or the grandiloquent speeches, but she had that rare ability to see beyond appearances, to hear the silences, to offer a comforting look and presence. Her colleagues respected her, even if some didn't always understand why she invested so much effort in often hopeless cases. That evening, a fresh autumn wind swept through the streets, stirring up dead leaves that swirled across the deserted sidewalks. Streetlights cast an orange glow on the facades, while rain threatened in the distance. Angela had just finished a long round when the unit leader's voice reached her. Urgent. Angela, we have a case in Wing 4B, room 27. A patient who has had almost no contact since his admission. It's urgent. He needs attention. Curious and attentive, Angela grabbed her badge, quickly checked her schedule, and headed toward this secluded part of the hospital, rarely visited by staff. Along the way, she noticed the different atmosphere, almost heavy, as if time itself had slowed down. Arriving in front of room 27, she consulted the file on the tablet. The name written, Samuel Jenkins, a 68-year-old man, a former university professor, suffering from a terminal degenerative disease. He had been admitted 2 weeks earlier, but due to complex administrative reasons and a lack of family visits, he had become what Angela called a ghost patient, left out, isolated, almost forgotten. As she pushed open the door, Angela was struck by the heavy silence that reigned. The room was plain, the curtains drawn, a dim light barely illuminating the face of the bedridden man. Samuel Jenkins looked fragile, his skin parched by time, his slender hands resting on the white sheets. Yet, in his eyes, behind the fatigue, shone a flame of lucidity and a deep sadness, that of one who has lived through invisible struggles. His once large and loving family had gradually drifted apart, swept away by life and the unspoken. The hospital, meanwhile, with its endless stream of patients and its constraints, had been unable to offer Samuel the human attention he so desperately needed. He received the essential technical care, but nothing to fill the void of loneliness. Angela approached gently, slowing each of her movements so as not to disturb this fragile moment. She knelt beside the bed, felt the temperature of the room, took a deep breath, then took Samuel's hand with infinite delicacy. This simple and sincere touch was a bridge to the humanity the patient had cruelly lost. In a soft but assured voice, she simply said to him, "Hello, I'm Angela. I'm here to take care of you." For Samuel, this simple gesture, this unexpected presence, was like a soft light piercing through the darkness that had enveloped him for too long. This rare and sincere human contact rekindled a spark in him that he thought had been extinguished. His gaze, previously dull and resigned, lit up with a fragile glow. A faint smile crossed his dry lips, almost imperceptible, but filled with immense gratitude. He was surprised, almost incredulous, that another person could finally take an interest in him, not as a simple patient or a number on a file, but as a human being. Angela, for her part, wasn't satisfied with what was required. She didn't limit herself to the mechanical gestures of medical care, the often standardized and impersonal care that many had stopped offering him. Day after day, she sat by his side, speaking softly to break the heavy silence. She told him light-hearted anecdotes, sometimes stories she invented on the spot, other times childhood memories or stories she had read. Those words, that soothing voice, were a breath of fresh air for Samuel. She made sure the room was always comfortable, adjusting the temperature, drawing the curtains to let in sunlight, making sure he was never without a warm blanket when the cold wind blew outside. Angela also made sure he ate properly, sometimes preparing a tray of his favorite dishes, even though hospital meals were often bland. She sat near him, shared his breaks, and stayed long after his shift had officially ended, refusing to leave him alone to face the night. Little by little, a subtle change took place. Samuel didn't miraculously regain his health. His illness remained relentless, but he did regain something even more precious: his dignity. He sat up slightly in bed, began to speak more confidently, to express his needs and wishes. His eyes regained a forgotten liveliness. The doctors, intrigued by this unexpected improvement, began to note positive signs in his reports. The hospital management was alerted by this development and by the enthusiastic remarks of the nursing staff. But most importantly, it was for Samuel himself. Thanks to Angela, he found a new lease on life. The simple fact of feeling that he still mattered to someone rekindled a flame of hope within him. One afternoon, while Angela was tidying up Samuel's things, she came across a yellowed envelope hidden in an old book on the nightstand. The letter, never sent, was addressed to a certain Professor David Harrington, a former colleague and friend of Samuel. Unfolding the paper, Angela discovered a poignant testimony. Samuel spoke of his quiet fight against segregation, his career as a civil law teacher, his hopes for a more just society, but also of the loneliness his illness imposed on him. This fragile document carried the voice of a man who had long worked in the shadows for justice and equality. Touched by this discovery, Angela felt a moral obligation to reconnect Samuel with the world he had been forced to leave unwillingly. She picked up the phone and contacted the university where Samuel had taught, seeking to reach former colleagues and members of civil rights organizations. Her approach was enthusiastically received. Soon, a small group of volunteers and friends returned to Samuel's life, visiting him regularly, bringing him news, books, and souvenirs. This social rebirth, accompanied by Angela's attention, profoundly transformed the final phase of Samuel's life. He was no longer a forgotten patient, but a man surrounded, listened to, and respected. And Angela, through her dedication, discovered a new dimension to her work, a mission she embraced with passion. Angela and Samuel's story quickly spread throughout Mercy General Hospital. What began as a simple gesture of compassion had become a true source of inspiration for the entire staff. Colleagues, initially impressed by Angela's patience and gentleness, began to take a different look at the often neglected patients, those whose fatigue and overwork made them invisible to many. Little by little, the story spread beyond the hospital walls. A local journalist, moved by this human story, wrote a poignant article in the Chicago Tribune. Angela and Samuel's story attracted the attention of the medical community, patient organizations, and even local elected officials. An awareness campaign was launched, highlighting the plight of isolated patients, often forgotten in the corridors of large hospitals. The goal was clear: improve protocols, increase attention to emotional needs, and create a support network for those who found themselves alone. Angela, who had never sought recognition, suddenly found herself thrust into the spotlight. She was invited to several conferences and seminars, where she spoke passionately about the importance of humanizing care. She spoke about her experience with Samuel, emphasizing the need to listen, to support, and to consider each patient as a whole person, with a story, dreams, and invisible pain. Her interventions were praised by her peers and hospital officials. Shortly after, she received a promotion. Angela was appointed palliative care coordinator. This position, which she accepted with humility and determination, allowed her to drive concrete changes in the approach to end-of-life care. She developed training programs for staff, created spaces for isolated patients to speak, and encouraged collaboration between doctors, nurses, psychologists, and volunteers. But beyond her career, what Angela understood deep down was that her true role went beyond technical procedures. She had become a voice, the voice of the forgotten, the voice of the invisible. She had learned that medicine was not just about diagnoses and treatments, but also about compassion, respect, and presence. And what she had given to Samuel, he had given back to her 1,000 times over. Through him, she had discovered a mission, a profound meaning to her commitment, a light in her own life. Each smile from Samuel, each word exchanged, had carved out within her a new momentum, a conviction that every life mattered, every moment of care could change a destiny. A few months later, Samuel, now surrounded by Angela, his new friends, and several of his former colleagues, made one last memorable public appearance. It was at the University of Chicago, in a packed room where students, professors, activists, and caregivers had come to listen to him. At the podium, despite his physical weakness, he found the strength to recount his journey, his fight against segregation, his passion for teaching civil rights, his struggle for justice, and above all, how a simple gesture of compassion had rekindled his hope. With tears in her eyes, Angela stood in the room, proud and moved, aware that their story was not just a single act, but that it carried within it a universal message. A message that resonated for a long time in the hearts of all present. This story, which has become a symbol, inspired hundreds of caregivers across the country. It reminded us that human greatness is sometimes found not in spectacular gestures, but in simply being there for those we forget. That it is in caring from the heart that true strength resides, capable of transforming lives and illuminating light in the darkness.